So we welcome Andrew Coppin, aka Andy Cops. So he's a storyteller from London, and he has taken out time for us to tell his stories and tell how it all started. And he has done a lot in his life till now. So he's a storyteller. He tells people and guides people how to speak about their brand. So he guides the entrepreneurs and the people enthusiastic about storytelling and speaking about their brand. So he has been in JP Morgan. So he was the vice president at JP Morgan Chase. And he has done many things for the society to give it back to the people and so that people can learn a lot. So welcome, Andy. Welcome a lot.
Hello, Faisy. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to tell my story.
Yeah. So first of all, we want to know how the name Andy Cops was discovered from Andrew Coppin, and having all the this corporate thing, corporate crown on your head, and from that thing to the stage name of Andy Cops.
It's a lovely story, actually, and it actually comes out of fear.
Fear.
How many things in our lives create or come to creation because we're going through stress and fear? And when I was working in the City of London, I actually trained as a chartered accountant. So that was my career, and that's what I went into. And for 20 years, I worked in a variety of technology and financial services companies. And towards the end of that time, I was introduced to storytelling, and I started volunteering and working with young children's charities on weekends, and I just found this love for, you know, the ability to create and share stories and our imagination. And there was a lady that came to our office, and I was working at JP Morgan at the time, and I started a working families network, which was for the employees. And we were given some budget, and I used to run lunchtime sessions, and we'd get keynote speakers to come in, external speakers. And I invited this lady, her name was Alison Royce. And Alison today actually is a good friend of mine. And she came in and she did a talk on the art of storytelling. And I sat there and I was mesmerized, and I realized just how powerful this tool is. And then when I started doing all the storytelling stuff, I thought, hang on, I need a name, you know, because the children couldn't say Andrew Coppin. It was too many syllables, and I needed a name. So I went from Andrew to Andy, which I have to say I was never an Andy. My whole life, my whole school, I was never an Andy. And I thought, oh, here we go. I'm going to be an Andy. And then I thought, no, I liked names with a few syllables, and I needed a surname, like one syllable. And then my nickname at school was Cop, just Cop, C-O-P. Everyone called me Cop. And then I found that I really enjoyed wearing a brown flat cap, and then I came up with Andy Cops. And it was only after I left the corporate world and started becoming a professional speaker, and I had to get public liability insurance, that I realized in the performing arts world, you're allowed to have two names. You can have a legal name and you can have a performance name. So I was thrilled. Oh, you mean I can actually have two names? This is great. So yes, it's a long story. Well, this is what happens when you ask a storyteller. Tell me the story. But that's how Andy Cops came to be. But there was a moment when I was still working and Andy Cops was around, and I was using it, and I thought, gosh, I can't let anybody know that got this other name, you know, I can't let people know. And it's just one of those strange things when you're working in the corporate world and you're scared and worried about sharing, you know, the other side of you, the creative side, one could say.
And which year was it?
Well, I started storytelling. Well, I started taking it seriously as an extramural activity, one could say, outside of my corporate job. That would have been back in 2016. And in 2017, I I realized that no, Andy Coppin needs to be, I need to create social media accounts. So in 2017, I started creating Instagram, and I created a Facebook page. And actually, Andrew Coppin is on Facebook, but I haven't used it. I just don't use it anymore. And that probably goes back to 2016. I haven't used it since.
And every storyteller somewhat starts from childhood. Like I have my memories of my father citing me the stories, and somewhere after leaving my corporate job, this was something that came into my mind, and it was somewhere in my soul already. So what is your that one incident, or maybe many incidents, where you felt inclined towards telling stories? I believe it would have started from childhood.
So your question was storytelling from childhood, and my inner storytelling soul. It was I come from a very creative family, and even though I steered towards going into the finance world, I think back to my grandmother, and my grandmother was an incredible storyteller. Of course, not professionally trained. She was just a very creative person, and she used to always tell us stories, and I was, I loved her stories. And my mother always made me write. As a young child, always had to write thank you letters, and we always had to write letters and send them to our grandparents. And I think that habit, I look back and I'm thinking, I'm so glad she did that, because I really enjoy writing. I enjoy writing with a pen. And I love, just exploring creativity through writing and then the storytelling. But to answer your question, I would say my grandmother. But there's one thing that I really miss. It's the sound of her voice, and I have no recordings, none, no recordings of her voice telling a story. And I think that's the one thing that I really, really miss.
And you have a long story shifting from South Africa to London and then establishing this whole empire. So, what were the main challenges? Because I could see there are sometimes challenges in performing and people's acceptance, and sometimes it's like intercultural differences. So, what were the challenges in your way?
Wow, what a great question. Aside from the challenges of being a South African living in London, I think one of the things that I find right now is a real challenge for me, aside from, I'm not even going to talk about the crisis that we find ourselves in with COVID and the impact that that's had on all our businesses and performing arts. I think it's just a given, right? That's a challenge that everyone is on. If we looked at the hero's journey, everybody is in this unknown space right now, all on the same path. But I think for me as a South African, and I love South African folklore, particularly the tribal folklore. Now, the generations of me in South Africa, we're going back to probably the 19th century, as when my family moved to, you could say, the origins of my family living in South Africa. And South Africa does have a troubled past, but there's one thing that I really found that I really love. It's the stories from, especially the African tribal stories, that even go back to early man, like the Bushman. But my grandmother introduced me to Zulu storytelling stories, and Zulu is the most spoken language in South Africa. So a good storyteller friend of mine that lives in London, her name's Wendy Shearer, and she said to me, Andy, you need to find your USP, your unique selling point, right? Like what is it that you are going to actually bring to the table in terms of storytelling? And she said, you should focus on African stories. So I started doing that. But I think one of the challenges I really face is feeling sometimes, I am, and I'll be very honest with this. It's sometimes I feel, do I have a right as a white South African to tell tribal African stories? And this has wrestled with me quite a lot. But I think what I've come to realize is that I am a storyteller, and the story needs to be told. So I give the story its undue respect, and I give the audience the respect when I tell the story. And I think that's made a huge difference, is just respecting the storyteller. respecting the story. But there is a lot of, one could say, controversy around is that your story to tell? And I say, well, I come from South Africa, and I love South Africa, and yes, I do feel that I have a right to tell these stories.
Good. And when we listen to your stories, and it has a lot of variety. It is for kids. It is for some real serious causes as well. And then we see the theater part. We are doing so many things all together. So how was the switch from corporate to storytelling? How did this switch happen?
You know, I think one needs to actually just go back to when you were a child and someone said to me, what were the 2 things you loved doing as a child? And for me, I look back and I realized as a young kid, I loved dressing up and characterizing things. And I had a crazy imagination as a child. And I still think I did, or I've always had a crazy imagination.
Mm.
And the other thing that I really enjoyed doing was being outside and making, being outside, being in the woods, or just making a fire, just doing that. So I think one needs to actually go back and figure out, who are you? Who are you really? Because I think there's a lot of confusion when we get to our latter teens, and kids that are put under so much pressure at the age of 17, 18 to decide what your career is going to be, without actually figuring out, well, who are you? And yes, there are psychometric tests, and there's Myers-Briggs, and there's all these various things that one can do to find out who you are and what you should be doing. The fact of the matter, though, is there's that balance between what you need to do. So I need to get a job to put bread on the table, but what is it that I also want to do? And I think it's striking that balance. And I think I just went down this career of, and I think many people do this, I need to do this. And that is everything. And the thing that I want to do, I have to wait till I retire. And I just couldn't accept that. And I think that was the creativity that was inside of me just was going, no. I'm not having any of that. And it was like a force I couldn't control. And it's still something that is a real struggle, because it's sort of, if you don't control ideas, if you don't control creativity, it can be very overwhelming.
True. So when we talk about your whole journey, and like everyone has this hero's journey, and then there comes the painful stages of a hero. So if we talk about Andy Coppin, so what were the painful stages? I mean, everybody does have this most painful time, painful area. What were the painful stages for you?
I think I would say to you, Faizi, I'm still on that journey. I think for me, the painful things are, it's that balance of knowing, okay, how much more should I put into this, and how much should I actually just disengage from, step back a bit and actually focus on something that I need to do. Going back to that challenge of, finding a job that will generate more revenue, because I think this has been a big awakening for many people. It's put us all on this hero's journey, that this real challenge, right? Whatever this villain is that we're facing, it's an unknown. And I think so we're in the unknown, and we also don't even know what it is that we're fighting against. And I think what I found, if one thinks about the hero's journey, the mentor and the companions, they've been my lifeblood. And I've lived by that phrase, find your tribe. So surround yourself with people that you understand and they understand you, and have that mentor. The mentor is the hard one, because the mentor is the one that listens and listens and listens. And I have a wonderful mentor, but you find that those mentors, my mentors, have changed as well. They have moved on. Some have passed away, sadly. And I've always found that the best mentors, and this is where the hero's journey is beautiful. I mean, when one thinks about what Joseph Campbell put together. And there's no surprise that the Hero of a Thousand Faces was just an outright success, right?
True.
But that's the beautiful thing, because we think about the hero, right? And then we look at the mentor, and the mentor is usually, typically, an elderly person. And this is where I think we as a society, and I don't want to generalize now, but because I know that the Indian culture, there is so much beautiful, and I'm going to use the word beautiful, respect for our elders. And I look at Western civilization and I just feel quite sad that, you know, elderly people don't get the respect that they deserve. So I think my hero's journey is actually looking at all the uplifting parts, because right now I'm still on this journey, and I think ask me in a couple of years' time and I'll tell you exactly what that real battle was, you know. So yeah, it's a wonderful way to look at your life. So
when you started in the starting time, you would have got many happy moments. That if you come on the stage, all the spotlight is on you, and then you perform your heart out, and people are like going crazy about your performance. So, what were those few happy moments or happiest stage performances that you remember? And when you think and you still get the goosebumps, what are those? If you could share some.
you know, I mean, this will resonate with you. So I love using pause. I use a great deal of pause in my storytelling.
Mm.
And what I love about the power of pause is that it draws eyes on you. And pause, silence is so powerful. It's so gripping. And I mean, there were moments when I think back where I stop on stage and you just see this entire audience absolutely still and quiet and looking at you.
Mm.
Thousands and thousands of eyes just staring at you.
Mm.
And you think, I've got you all. I've got you all in the palm of my hand. And often I have recollections of that, which are absolutely stunning. But I think working in schools, when you've got hundreds of children sitting in front of you, and what stories do is they allow the inner child to be relaxed in order to listen. And particularly in the schools here in the UK, you know, children would come in and they would sit in an orderly way in rows, you know, rows upon rows of rows, and they're all sitting nicely. And then I've seen where over the space of me telling a story, the children move, they reposition themselves, they get more relaxed. And I'll never forget, I was telling a story of Roald Dahl's book, Billy and the Minpins. I'm very fortunate to have a license to tell that story. And this little girl ended up, she was lying on her tummy and she was resting her head on her hands. Her chin was in her hands and she was on her elbows, just staring at me. And she had moved from that fixed position that the teachers wanted her to sit nicely, and she was now relaxed listening to the story. And working with special needs children, I think my all-time memorable experience was, and then I realized what I needed to do when I was telling a story, and this little girl, she had a teaching assistant. So in the UK, children that have special education needs usually have a teaching assistant that is dedicated to supporting them. And she came in to listen to the story, and she would have been about 7 years old. So she was 7 years old in this group, and there were hundreds of kids in the room. And as I was telling the story, and it was a South African Zulu story, and it's about a young lady that goes in search of the story, in search of stories. And she has to go to the sea. And in the sea, she meets the king and the queen of the ocean. And I was telling the story all the way through. And this little girl, whose name was Autumn, she got up and she came over to me. And I have this little albino gorilla. It's a little gorilla, but he's white. So he's an albino gorilla, a little stuffed toy that sits on the chair. And I use puppets and soft toys to engage with the early years children. And this little girl had a monkey in her hand as well. And she came up to me and she gave me a piece of paper, a small piece of paper that had been folded up. So it had been folded up, and she gave it to me. And she said, "This is for your monkey." And I said, "Oh, thank you." And I took that piece of paper and I put it down next to my monkey. And I carried on with the story. And this happened again. And she came up and she said, "This is for your monkey." She gave me another piece of paper. And I took it and I put it down. And towards the end of the story, it's a scene where the protagonist in the story gives the king and the queen a gift. And the king and the queen are elated. They're so happy with this gift. They shine this multitude of colors, brighter than the sun. And soon after I told that, little Autumn came up again, this time with her teacher. And the teacher said to me, "She wants you to open the pieces of paper." And she opened and I stopped and I said, "Oh, okay." And I was thinking, gosh, why didn't I do that? And I opened the pieces of paper and I realized what she had been doing. She had been drawing pictures of what she saw inside her head. So she had drawn all these pictures and had gifted them to my monkey. And it was the one that will never leave me. That was an emotional point where I stood there and went, wow, this is incredible.
And by the way, that story is also one of my favorite stories of yours. When I went through your YouTube channel, so that was the first story that I actually watched. Super nice, super nice. And what I get inspired when I see so many stories of yours on different topics, and then I came to know about My London Voice. So how the idea of My London Voice came into existence, when you're already doing 10 different dynamic things?
So this goes back to my time when I realized, having worked through a corporate career, that people need to see the beautiful aspect of story. The story needs to be included in their lives. And I think people get confused by using words like anecdotes and case studies, all these formal corporate words, when in essence all it is a story. And people don't realize when they see top business leaders standing up and delivering an amazing speech, just how much of that speech is a story. and I realized, no, I've got to do something. So I started, and this was in 2019. 2018. Myself and my business partner, Vinny, Vinny is a shortened version of her full name is Shrivanitha. And Shrivanitha Sivakumar from India as well. So, and she and I started this idea of creating a company to facilitate creativity for business professionals. And we created the company, and then we started doing market research. And part of that, I wanted to help people improve public speaking through storytelling. And I started this. And through all the market research we were getting here in the UK was people did not understand the word storytelling. And that was confusing. So we had this company called My London Voice, and we then actually we changed the whole business plan. And now My London Voice is all about bridging the gap of communication. And we're using words like communication, effective communication, presentation skills, public speaking, etc., etc. However, what's come out of that is I've developed a program called Speak Your Brand, which is just you could say a product that we deliver within My London Voice. My London Voice has other speakers. I have a parent coach who helps with communication in the family. I have a very good speech and vocal and accent coach, Nancy. So whenever I have a client or somebody that comes to me that really needs help with public speaking, then I try to put them in front of Nancy first, because she is the professional that can help you overcome any challenges when it comes to, enunciation and variation, and ultimately speech. So yeah, but speak your brand is the thing that I'm focusing on now, and it's no different. This is the beautiful thing about stories. Stories relate to everybody, all ages. Doesn't matter if you're 3 or 83, the story still applies. And this is speak your brand is no different to what I'm doing with early years. It's just I'm dealing with different aged people.
Super, super. And like so many people look up to you when coming to the profession of storytelling and story writing, pursuing that profession. So what is your message to the millennials, for the people who want to pursue storytelling as a profession?
It's a real that there's still a long way to go, especially here in the UK. I don't think people can actually look at storytelling easily and think I can do that for a living, leave school and become a storyteller. There's a lot of work still to be done. The Society for Storytelling, which you know all too well, and we have, I mean, the Society for Storytelling has attracted so many people over the COVID period, but there's a strong focus on developing storytelling in younger ages. But it's not something that is academically recognized. There aren't sufficient institutions to provide accreditation to storytelling. And I think people struggle to see, well, how am I going to make a living out of this? Because it is very much a freelance career where you have to decide, what are you going to be? Are you going to be a writer? Are you going to be an actor? Are you going to be an educator? And I think for me, I look at myself as being an educator. The story, it's not about me, it's about you, it's about others. And that's what I'm trying to facilitate in the work I'm doing. It's helping others tell their story. But I tell stories and I use my skills to empower, to inspire, to motivate others to tell theirs.
And then you have your brands under you who teach people, educate people on this concept. Whenever you're speaking about the brand story or talking about public speaking or maybe exploring the stories within and then coming up in public. And that's the cause you're fulfilling.
That's absolutely correct. So at the moment I run a webinar, like a 60-minute webinar. And just looking now at the challenges we have of trying to do workshops in person, it's looking likely that I am going to have to just continue to use Zoom. So I use a platform called Crowdcast for live streaming my webinars, and then for workshops I have groups of 8 to 10 people, but I do one-to-one as well. So I do have clients that come to me for one-to-one. But what I really want to do is actually have, I think my main focus is to say I want more workshops of 8 to 10 people, because that is where you see change. Because people then are putting themselves into a situation with other people and experimenting and trying things out. They are making themselves vulnerable, one could say. And then you see beautiful change. I think one-to-one is still too safe, in my opinion. There's no, a person can feel safe. I really want them to feel brave. Put yourself out there, give it a go, do it.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Andy, for your time. It was very helpful to go inside and then learn about the things that you have been through. So I wish you a lot of luck for all the companies that you're running, for all your work, whether it's the stage work that inspire us, or maybe sometimes the horror stories that you keep on directing. We are looking forward for your great work. Thank you so much for your time. And we wish to see your show in India very soon.